thank you for joining us for our BCDA podcast. Today we have with us is Mark Schiavone with the Farmland Protection Board.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So Mark, can you explain a little bit what the Farmland Protection Board is?
I can. It's a unit of county government, so the board members are appointed by the county council following an outline in state law in terms of who needs to be on the board. It's farmers and it's people that are recommended by the Farm Bureau, the Conservation District. The Economic Development Director is on statutorily, so you're one of my board members, and I'm glad to have you on the board.
Thank you.
We, being part of county government, we're funded by a transfer tax on real property. So every time that there's somebody purchase land or a house or a condominium in the county, they pay a small amount of a transfer tax. The majority of that goes to the county council. Some still goes to the State Housing Development Authority, although that's being run down over time. And my board receives $2.20 per $1,000 of value of real property. So that funds the program, and that makes up the board.
Now, do you receive any funding from the state in addition to?
Not directly from the state, no. There is an Agricultural Land Protection Authority, which is part of the Department of Agriculture for the state. They receive funds from a recordation fee across the state. That means that they're less well funded than even the Berkeley County Board is. They do spend money buying conservation easements in other counties. Usually they serve kind of as a financial assistance. So for instance, if Monroe County has a highly rated property, but they don't have the money to fully close the deal, or they're trying to match federal money and they don't have enough for the match, the state will kick in. Of our 76 easements, 2 of them are funded by the Agricultural Land Protection Authority. Our bigger funding source when we look for matching funds is the United States Department of Agriculture, Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS. So you'll hear me use that acronym a lot. They participate in a 50-50 match, and about a third of our easements have been funded with such matches. So we've received, I'm going to say, about $8 million in matches over the years from the NRCS.
Wow. So a conservation easement, for those that don't know what a conservation easement is, can you explain?
Yeah, they're interesting little beasties. It's a legal instrument. So a conservation easement is finalized by recording a deed in the courthouse called a deed of conservation easement. And it's a mutual agreement between the property owner and the Farmland Protection Board, or it can be a private land trust, but we're going to focus on farmland protection. And it permanently restricts subdivision moving forward. So that's where the phrase "this land's protected forever" comes from. So no future subdivision. All industrial use is prohibited, and almost all commercial use. And I slow down there because agriculturally related commercial uses are generally permitted. All agricultural use is permitted, and residential use is permitted. One common misconception among people is that once you go into an easement, you can't build anything else, and that's not accurate. If there's a house existing on a farm, we survey a 2-acre area around that called a residential envelope, and inside of that container, you can continue to build structures which relate to the residential use of the property. So, for instance, an in-ground swimming pool clearly doesn't have an agricultural use. That's residential. 3-car garage, in addition to the house, things of that sort.
But as long as it's within that 2-acre parcel that's carved out.
That's right. And then on the remainder of the property, you can continue to build structures that relate to the agricultural use. So that's your loafing barns, it's silos, it's equipment sheds, and it can be a facility that allows you to produce an agricultural product, provided that at least 50% of what's being produced is coming off of that land. So we have a family in the Weinbrenner Road, Van Cleesville area that runs a small poultry slaughtering operation. That's a permitted use. The majority of the poultry that are being processed in that facility are coming off of that farm. And the nice thing is that they can bring poultry in from other farms as well. you can run up to 2,000 square feet of a retail space. So if that farming family chooses in the future to actually sell the processed poultry on their farm, they can do that. And that's true across all categories of agriculture.
Protecting agriculture is extremely important. I am in the business of attracting new businesses here, but the importance of protecting the land and having still that green space is very important.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up because I hear voices on occasion, not in my head, but out in the community, and not necessarily in Berkeley County, but across the state, where they're framing this as being in conflict somehow. And I don't see that. I think that it's the wisdom why the Economic Development Director by state statute is a board member with a vote. It's important for the Economic Development Director to kind of coordinate and know what's going on with the board. So my perspective on this is that, first of all, what you're doing in terms of commercial and industrial development is absolutely one of the best things that can happen. I'm proud that Berkeley County is doing as much as it is. Our farmers kind of have an intuitive sense when they live close to an area that seems likely to be commercially or industrial developed. I don't hear from those people. They're not interested in the program. And I'm perfectly fine with that. The program is called the Voluntary West Virginia Protection Act. It's interesting that between the US 11 and the I-81 corridors, we have exactly one easement, and that's an early donation on about a 35-acre parcel. The rest of those property owners, I've never had any contact from them, and we're really fine with that. Now, that said, I'm not an economist, but I have an intuitive sense that strong economies include a really good mix of different sectors. And in Berkeley County, we're one of the top agricultural producers in the entire state, and a lot of people don't know that. As per the Census of Agriculture, and this is a census that the U.S. Department of Agriculture runs every 5 years. So we're looking at data from 2017. This is a census year, but they're still doing the polling. The value of product produced in Berkeley County was over $25 million. There's 500 people who are in the county that are full-time employed as farmers. And that equates to about 900 farming families. In fact, the number of farms in the county has gone up, even though the acres of farmed land have gone down. So I think we have a viable agricultural sector, and it's not really in conflict with the growing industrial and the commercial sector. In particular, we're protecting more and more land in Back Creek. And when we protect farms, we're focusing on the viability of the farm and also the presence of agriculturally important soils, so-called prime soils. And this is a technical term that the USDA uses. And you can't make good soil anymore. So it's important at the same time for us to have areas of the county that are protected, right, that are also agriculturally viable.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. You mentioned there's 76 farms that are currently in easement. Can you explain how they would go about applying to be in the program?
It's a pretty simple process. We have about a 3-page application form. A lot of the information we're capturing is some of the features of the property that we may not know just driving by, whether you have a spring, for instance. We need all of the legal owners to sign the application form because ultimately this is going to be a real estate transaction. So, the equivalent is that if there were 3 people that owned a house and one of them decided they didn't want to participate in the sale, you're not going to be able to sell the house easily. So we need all property owners to be on board with this. It's a competitive process unless you're offering to donate your easement, and we do get a few property owners that do that. We have 5 or 6 or 7 out of the 76 that were donations, but most people want to be compensated. So we will accept applications at any time. We close our application period, however, at the end of October, and that's when staff then sits down and scores the properties. There are 2 of us in the office. We score the properties independently. We then sit down in December and see if there were any differences, where the mistakes arose. By the time we've gone through that process, then we invite the board in. You participated as a brand new board member. I call that the vetting process. That's where we go through the top 10 ranked properties, and the board hopefully challenges us on each one of those.
Like you said, I have seen the application process that you provided to us, and there's a lot of information that goes into that, and that you guys go out and survey and make sure, what's on their application matches.
That's right. We do go out to visit the properties. So if there's a claim, a lot of data we can capture. So if you claim that you've got more than 1,700 feet on West Virginia Route 51, that's a map issue, and we can do that in the office. But when there's a claim that there may be a wetlands or a spring, it's important for us to go out and verify that claim. The other thing we're doing is we're just looking to make sure that there's no issues, like there was a lot of excavation, or I've never had this happen, but that there's a leaking pesticide tank somewhere. That's going to cause an encumbrance that we're going to need to address before we select the property. So we go out and visit our properties. By the time our January meeting rolls around, the board is then ready to review the top-ranked properties. Ideally, we've set money aside at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is in June or July, rather. So by July or August, the board has set money aside. I like doing that because it's like the cleanest and the highest road approach, that no one can ever claim that a board member voted to take Aunt Franny's farm because they knew that they could afford it. Those funding decisions, set-asides, were done well before all the applications are in. So by January, we've selected properties. We then approach the owners to make sure that they are willing to proceed, and if they are, then we order the restricted use appraisal. That's going to value what the easement is worth, and this is not the easiest concept, but an easement really is the subdivision rights off of a property. So a restricted use appraisal comes back with two numbers. The fair market value, that's what the land would be worth if it was sold on the market today. Now, interestingly, that number subtracts out any existing buildings. And that's because in this appraisal, the before and after scenarios don't really involve the buildings. So the after value is the restricted use value. That's what that same parcel would appraise for if it was already encumbered by an easement. So as an example, fair market value of a farm may end up coming in at $7,000 an acre. The restricted use value may come in at $3,000 an acre, and that difference is $5,000 an acre, and that's what the easement's worth. By state law, we can't pay more than the lower of the owner's ask or the appraised value. So if the owner asks $4,500, the easement appraised at $5,000, we're going to go with the $4,500. So once the appraisal is done, if the owner is good with that, then we continue to do the rest of the due diligence, and the board pays for that. So we order a title work. Once that's done, that gets passed to the survey. We have a survey of the property. We do an easement documentation report. That is mainly used for the IRS, but the board also uses it kind of as a document that memorializes what the property roughly looked like about the time that the easement went into effect. At that point, we're working on the draft deed of conservation easement, and we're ready to go to closing. It typically takes about a year. I'm trying to get that shortened down to 9 months.
Okay. Well, I think you're doing a good job. There's a lot of work that I said entails going through even with the application process alone. So what is, other than doing everything that you just mentioned, your day-to-day?
So the other side of it is so-called stewardship. And in stewardship, what we're doing is working with any issues, questions from the property owners that are already into easement. So as time has gone on, as an example, when I first took this position a little more than 8 years ago, we had half of the number of easements we have now. And I think if I was asked to compare the board to a person, we were still in our youth. Rambunctious, kind of going crazy, acquiring more and more easements, which we did. And now that we're up to 76 easements, 8,000 acres, we're more like in middle age, and we're beginning to get the sobering idea that things happen. We have not had anything seriously happen yet. This is more along the lines of property owners will call to say, I want to put up another equipment shed. Can I do that? We have a couple of farms where, and failed to mention that you can build on the easement, but there is a cap of no more than 2% of the easement can be impervious or built surfaces. So I do have a couple of properties that are kind of close to that 2%. And so in that situation, we remind the property each time the owner each time we go out. So right now, in terms of stewardship, our stewardship coordinator is scheduling our annual visits because we do have in addition to the due diligence and acquiring an easement, we need to continually make sure that the terms and conditions of the easement are being addressed. You can think of this as being easement police. I don't like doing that. My property owners are wonderful people. I love going out once a year and chatting with them, meeting them, seeing what's new in their lives, and addressing any questions they may have about the easement. But stewardship is the other part of it. And then the rest is just, how do we get the word out to people? We spent a lot of time in the past couple of years improving our policy manual. We now have a continuity of operations plan. A lot of documents that I learned when I worked for Jefferson County government, we've now made sure that our board has as well. So hopefully we're a modern 21st century organization.
Speaking of that, you said you've been there 8 years. And you've already mentioned some with the policies. How have you seen things change throughout the years?
It's been mainly in that maturation of going from a young organization that was focused on acquiring to an organization where we're spending more time answering questions from property owners. And I think as we move forward, that will be the case. When you sit down and listen to people at the national level that have been in this business for a long time, there's land trusts in Vermont, for instance, that manage 600 or 700 easements. It will be only a matter of time before there is some serious issue that comes up on an easement. It can be a natural disaster, like a forest fire. It can be trespass from a neighbor, or it can be a misunderstanding of, for instance, a new owner of an acquired property. Again, we haven't had any of those yet, but as you acquire more easements, just statistically, it's going to be a matter of time. So that's the stewardship side.
Yeah, I think as, the land gets sold and, throughout the years, that could be something where the stewardship, they just have to keep on track of it. So
every time a property changes hands, we go out and meet the new property owners. Ideally, if the property is being sold through a real estate agent, we've already met the agent with the owner's permission and passed them information so they have a sense of what they're selling, and so they can.
That's important.
Yes, because we don't want to get anyone in trouble, and I don't want to get an agent or a real estate lawyer in trouble for misunderstanding our easements. So we're all over meeting with people to be able to discuss how these work.
So these easements, they're in Berkeley County, but they're also in all the other 55 counties?
No, that's a good question. There are 20 counties in West Virginia that have active farmland protection programs. So now I'm going to put on my hat. I'm the chairman of the West Virginia Association of Farmland Protection Boards. Of those 20 counties, 18 are active programs. That is to say that their county commissions have enabled the transfer tax fee. So these programs are being funded. If you look at a map, almost all of those every county in West Virginia that's east of the Allegheny Front, so that's all the way down to Monroe County, Pocahontas, Pendleton, Greenbrier, all the way up to Preston, Morgan, Jefferson, Berkeley, Hampshire. All of those counties are early adopters of the program. When you get west of the Allegheny Front and all the way to the Ohio River, you begin to get the issue of severed mineral rights. And that can be a problem, especially getting federal funding. And what does that mean? At some point, typically 1900, early in the prior century, property owners sold either their coal rights or their natural gas rights or all of the mineral rights under their land. That was a good thing for them. But what that means is that technically the owners of the mineral rights have the ability to modify the surface to get to those minerals. And so you can't have a mine open up. But that said, Lincoln, Harrison, Upshur, Roane, Nicholas are all counties that have active boards, and they all deal with the mineral rights issues. In those cases, they just don't try to seek matching federal funds. They purchase their easements using the local money only.
And now that are they all as successful as the Berkeley County?
We're the most successful, but it's because we're the oldest. And I say that with a grain of salt because according to the records, we beat Morgan County out by exactly one day. For some reason, the Berkeley County Council back then, and I guess it will soon be a council again, maybe,
Hopefully.
the Berkeley County Council met on a Wednesday. And so they voted to enact our program, and then the next day, the Morgan County Commission met and voted to enact their program. But yes, Jefferson County has, I think, 54, 55 easements. They have a work list of a whole bunch that they're acquiring. That's true of Hampshire County, where their farms are way larger than ours. So Hampshire may hold fewer easements, but they're probably closing in on our acreage.
Okay.
And it's true for most of the other counties, particularly the ones that are within these fertile valleys in the Valley and Ridge part of the state.
I did hear that you are retiring as well.
I'm hoping to.
You're hoping to.
So yes, I'm scheduled to retire at the end of June. The board has been advertising for some time now, and we're advertising in a whole variety of sources. So we've been in the Martinsburg Journal. There's a whole bunch of conservation web boards and listservs that we're on. And I think the board is looking for somebody ideally that has some experience in this field. Barring that, I think that a successful candidate would have good management and organizational skills and would be a very quick learner. This process, and it surprised me when I first took this position 8.5 years ago. And I should mention my property is under easement in Jefferson County, so I'd kind of seen some of this from the consumer's side or the property owner's side. But there are nuances to these deeds, to the federal programs that we interact with. I'm hopeful that they find somebody. That said, I've already told the board that I'm not going anywhere, and if they need me to stay around, probably as a consultant instead, I'm more than willing to do that. But yeah, we are looking for my replacement.
Well, I'm sure you will be around for a while, so and much needed because your knowledge of the conservation easements and the Farmland Protection Board is above anyone else's that I've talked to. So.
Well, thank you. I've got some good colleagues out there that have been doing this work longer than I have, but I appreciate that.
So, is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
Just that if you're interested in the program, please contact me. That we cannot make new farmland. It's an important resource. The American Farmland Trust slogan, "No farms, no food," has a lot of truth to it. It's critical that moving forward, particularly for just national security, that we have viable working farms that are local so that we can continue to produce the riches that United States agriculture has been producing since the founding of the country and before.
And what is the website again?
We are at WVFP.org. That's West Virginia Farmland Protection. So WVFP.org/Berkeley, or just at WVFP.org. There'll be links that will get you to any of the active farmland protection boards.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for joining me today.
This was a great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.